Paige Poppy, as Raquel shared, and I want to thank you all so much for coming, taking the time to come and spend your morning with me. And I want to thank Lauralee and Brian, who are the coordinators of Creative Morning Phoenix, who couldn't be here today, but they approached me at one of my events and asked me to speak, and I was just honored. And I think that was in maybe September of last year. So now here we are in April, and I'm really happy to be with you. And I think we'll have fun today talking about spicy. So as Raquel shared a little bit about me, I am an artist from Scottsdale, born and raised. My dad is also born and raised in Scottsdale. I lived in Gilbert the first 7 years of my life, but we moved back to the heart of Papago Park, which is my favorite place in the world. Honestly, my backyard. I rode my bike around there and grew up, exploring the desert. But as Raquel shared, I did not appreciate the beauty of the desert growing up here. I think that's a kind of a similar experience I have learned that a lot of people have. I think I really interpreted it as dusty and brown and maybe a little bit boring at the time, which of course, in my experience, I feel like Phoenix as a whole has grown so much since childhood. There's the creative community has exploded. And I, attended a lot of First Fridays in high school, going to school in downtown Phoenix. And that was the first time where I thought, oh, wow, what a special place this is. And there is a community here. And I think a lot of times really interesting people are born out of, creating a lot of art in a place that there might not be. So I have really learned to appreciate it. So it took me going away for college. I went to school in California and I came back 1 year on spring break. We'll talk about that experience later because it kind of was a big bursting inspiration point for me. But I came back on spring break, all the cacti were blooming, and I thought, oh my God, what was I thinking? It's so vibrant, it's so colorful, and it was such a shift for me. And maybe that was a thing with maturity also, just to learn to appreciate where you're from. And I think that's kind of like a hometown feeling as well. So I'll be happy to share about my art with you today, and just a little more of my background too that we'll talk about is that I went to architecture school. So I have a Bachelor of Architecture. That is what I had planned to pursue and kind of got evolved into this direction. But you'll see how a lot of that mindset and education kind of still influences my work today. So I really have an appreciation for education and other backgrounds. And I really feel that you can take from one education and apply it to other areas of your life. So looking forward to sharing that with you on the topic of spicy today. And I know the Tucson chapter selected this topic. And when I thought about it, I thought, wow, this is a challenge. How will I think about something with cooking and flavor and relate it to my art? But I really think that art is flavorful and spice is what creates flavor. And Raquel also said one of the classic quotes, variety is the spice of life, which I know is like a very tagline, kind of cheesy line, but I have always appreciated that. And I really have felt that I thrive with variety in my work. You'll see I do a lot of different types of projects, different types of events, different products. And I have enjoyed that I can approach my day and not just focus on one singular painting. It's I might be, shipping orders or designing a product using digital tools and then doing a painting. So I really enjoy approaching my days with that kind of variety in both subject matter of art, so maybe cacti and cowgirl boots, but then also the project types like events versus a mural painting. And I do also want to share how spicy translates to creativity as a whole so that you can take away from it. I really hope I can inspire you today. I don't want this to be all about just my work. So getting into that, these are the 5 topics I will relate today with spicy. We have sunshine, nature, texture, growth, and vibrance. And I know we will be doing questions at the end, but truly, I feel like these are like good 5 points that once I wrap a topic like sunshine, if there's something that prompts you that you want to ask a question, please feel free to ask me, because I would love to tailor this to like what you actually are interested in. And if you're kind of curious about one area, I can go into that a little bit more. So please feel free. And before we get into the 5 topics, again, on the note of spicy, I was reminded of my garden. So I had never been a gardener, and I'll talk throughout, but I have had the kind of unique opportunity to also spend a lot of time in Minneapolis and Nashville. I'll talk about that, but Minnesota was a special place because I think you could throw anything in the ground and it will grow bountifully. Like, this makes me look like very skilled, and I did nothing. The soil is just like so rich, but I just love this photo, the colors, the texture. I think you could put all 5 of these categories into here. And I did grow jalapenos and habaneros in my garden. And I actually learned that sunshine, which will be my first topic, it contributes to spicier jalapenos. So the hotter the sun, the hotter the pepper. I think peppers in general really do well in the sun. So I found that to be interesting. And nature is the subject of my work, but I always say that sunshine is my greatest inspiration. So similarly to how it makes peppers spicier, I just really love how it illuminates the colors of nature and the desert. I'm just amazed every day. I think it just creates this glow, and I have some photographs throughout that will see that it just is so special, the way it just highlights the beauty of the desert and really adds so much dimension and life. So you will see I really use a lot of yellow throughout my paintings, and that comes from my love of the desert, or my love of warmth and sunshine. And sometimes that use of yellow might be, very literal. We have a, nice yellow palette, or it might be more subtle where it's worked into my paintings. And you will see throughout my work that almost 99% of my work really leans more warm tone. That's just what I gravitate towards color wise. And for a long time, I never used any blue or purple. They were like my least favorite colors. And I should have included a photo of it, but I did a painting for a client that wanted like a monsoon setting of an ocotillo. And like the entire background was blue and purple. And I was nervous. And when I painted it, I was like, this is amazing. Like, why have I not liked purple? And so now it's not something I shy away from, but you will see like even all of these purple colors. I guess the screen, it's a little bit cooler toned, but the actual one here, everything leans very warm. So that's all kind of a nod to my inspiration. And yellow is the color I use most of. I always have to repurchase it most often. I always have to refill my palette with it. These are, if anyone's curious, these are Peerless watercolors. They're like a paper watercolor that you activate. It's like a square of paper. I haven't used these as much lately, but if you saw my physical palette, like the yellow well of the paint is always like very, very low. So I have to repurchase that a lot and refill it. And I will say I'm not a poet. Funny enough, my dad loves to write poems. He texts me a poem like every single day. It's really sweet. And he writes, they're all about the garden and life. It's adorable. But I guess he inspires me occasionally because sometimes I will write one. So I had this that I thought was appropriate for today. It says, "You are awake, the sun is streaming in, greeting you, and the time is now. Open the window and say, I am here, I am ready, show me the sun." Which I thought might be a nice metaphor for life. It can be really literal. I think we should all experience nature and spend time in it and have that glow on our face. It's so transformative, even for a few minutes. But it also could be about just, greeting a new opportunity. Myra, my friend, asked me today if I speak often, and I don't get a chance to speak too often. So I was a little nervous for today, but I think it's always good to take those risks if someone offers you that opportunity. And now we'll move into my next topic, which is nature. Like I said, if anyone has questions throughout each topic so far, if anyone does, you're welcome to ask. But I also can keep going. I don't feel like there's been that much question yet. So now we'll move into nature, which of course relates back to spicy, talking about flavor. All the spices come from nature, which is incredible when you think about it. These things just grow and are because of, when you think about like just a little sun and water, how much flavor and life we get from spice and also nature. It's really quite amazing. So I said that sunshine was my greatest inspiration. I would say nature is as well, but nature is kind of more of like the umbrella. So I now call myself a nature artist. It was kind of helpful to have like a tagline to share to encompass what I do. And you'll see I've branched out to different subjects, but I call myself a nature artist. And this painting is from my first ever collection that I released in March of 2015. That collection is called Technicolor Botanical. And it's kind of crazy. Next year will be 10 years. So I have a lot. I have like kind of celebrated the anniversary every year, and I really look forward to that. And I have celebrated it so much because Technicolor Botanical was this turning point for me with my art. When I talked about how I didn't appreciate the beauty of the desert, this was the spring break trip where I came home to Arizona and I thought, wow, I was really not appreciating what was around me all this time. And I painted these pieces. There was 9 of them, I believe, initially. And it's funny, like 4 of these I don't really have in rotation, but like these 5, I still consider some of my most like popular pieces today and have kind of become like my signature collection. But I painted these a mixture of poolside at my parents' house because I was home on spring break and like just sit outside. And I really try to paint and draw outdoors as often as I can. I think that kind of lends itself back to like the sunshine and how it really illuminates colors. And so I painted these pieces poolside and also in my college bedroom back in California. So this last picture that you saw was like my little desk in college. And that was kind of a time where I was doing my thesis for architecture school, but I was like so inspired by watercolor. I was doing both. So I remember I would like stay up until midnight doing my architecture projects. And then I would keep going until like 2, 3 in the morning painting because I was so inspired. And I think at the time it was nice to have a departure from architecture school. It was very rigid, not too black and white, but it was more geometric and technical. And I think I really appreciated having something organic and colorful to spend time on as well and create that balance just for my own mental escape. Maybe it was a very difficult major. And it's funny because that's been almost 10 years ago now that I graduated school, but it's become like so much a part of what I still do now that it was almost just an outlet for me. And I'll talk more also about how I kind of discovered why watercolor was kind of my medium. But those initial 9 watercolors are still pieces, like I said, that I share today. And Technicolor Botanical has evolved beyond those paintings into new artworks as well that I created years later, but I feel like fit into that umbrella of Technicolor Botanical. And this collection was also such a turning point for me because I had been practicing watercolor so much. And when I painted these pieces, I really felt like, oh, I have like found who I am as an artist and they're resonating with me. And then they also started resonating. Sorry, I touched the microphone. They also started resonating with my audience. And it was then that I realized like, oh, I was interpreting the desert as dusty and brown. And now I'm also sharing with other people how magical and colorful the desert is. And I felt like, in a way, I was not teaching, but I was kind of opening other people's eyes to the magic of nature, is what I always say, or nature's magic. And that was so special because it wasn't just something I was doing singularly. I thought it was interesting. And now I still hear to this day that people appreciate that, either if they move here, or funny enough, I have had a lot of clients who will move out of Arizona, and the art can be a way for them to remember how special the desert was and what they appreciate about it, which I think is just so cool. And that's been my experience too, having, left and came back and traveling. So I really feel like that is what I clung to because other people were enjoying it as much as I was. And this really just burst open a world of ideas for me, as you can see. I still create pieces, as soon as, or as recent as last month, that like fit into this Technicolor botanical. And I feel like cacti in particular, I could probably paint for 100 years and like never tire of. There's so many ideas and textures, and we'll get into all of that because they're just incredible. But something I say is time spent in nature is time well spent. I really don't feel like I have ever regretted time that I've spent outdoors. So I hope I can encourage you to do the same, even if you're in the middle of I've been in a polar vortex a few times, which is like -50 wind chill. So even then, it's really brutal, but I feel like you always can learn something from it and find new textures and new ideas. And I think I touched on this, but I wrote here that nature creates endless ideas for me because it's so bountiful and interesting. And this has really evolved into appreciation of all landscapes and climates. So I mentioned California is where I went to school. I also spent 9 months in Copenhagen, Denmark during my architecture school. I did one of the years there. And then I mentioned Minneapolis and Nashville, just kind of a unique experience for someone who is so obsessed with Arizona. My boyfriend actually did his PhD in Minneapolis for the past 6 years. And currently he's doing his postdoc at Vanderbilt in Nashville. So I have had this really unique opportunity to experience these different landscapes and climates and, totally different flora and fauna that are just wonderful that I would have never otherwise appreciated. And it has been a good life lesson for me because when I found out he was going to go to the University of Minnesota, I sobbed like immediately. Like he walked in the door from visiting and I just knew he loved it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to go back and forth. And it was so silly looking back. My mom is from Minnesota. So I had been going every summer my whole life. And like, it was a place I loved. And I'm like, why did I fight this so hard? And it turned out to be such a source of inspiration for me and just an incredible landscape. And, this is like a very literal interpretation of Minnesota, the lake, but I felt like even when I'm there, I had really a lot of like good headspace and creativity. And I still created a lot of my like desert artworks when I would be in Minnesota. So we've made it work. I go back and forth still. And also Nashville since August has been. So it's really been a special experience. This is also another piece I created inspired by Minnesota and Minneapolis as a city. And this actually was a piece that was printed on vinyl panels that were 8 feet tall by 4 feet wide. And then they were hung in the windows of a grocery store, like turning a corner. And it was 32 feet long because there were 8 panels of it. So I really found fresh inspiration there. And I look back now, I think like I probably could have approached a burnout maybe if I hadn't, experienced these new places. So now I make a point to really, like I said, time spent in nature is time well spent. I really make a point now to get out and have that headspace. I think you only can find so much inspiration indoors, and it's good just to experience new places. And I've included this also. I'll talk about some of my mural paintings later, but it's funny going to school in California. I feel like beach and waves is like the one subject I haven't pursued as often, but I recently did this mural painting at the top of the year. And funny enough, on Monday, I will be extending this piece for this client because they want the waves to go on the other side of the building too. So I thought I would include that, just different subjects. It all comes back to nature and how incredible it is, the shapes and the texture. And I mentioned painting outdoors as well, I think is just a different experience. And so I included my Minnesota and my Tennessee inspiration. This I also painted outdoors at the botanical garden there, Cheekwood. But in Minnesota, I had the wonderful tulips that would bloom at the same time every year. And I have hundreds of tulip paintings. I have like some sketchbooks that are just tulips because once again, it was like a flower that I had never really appreciated being here. We don't have them as often and they're really bountiful there. So I guess the lesson there is just to be open to the new opportunities because it was something I fought so hard. And now I think it's really added a new level to my work and to not just be, the cactus girl when I think I was that for a long time. And it as a business wise too, it opened new ideas for me of people saying, hey, could you paint this for me? And I thought, yeah, okay, like now I can because I have taken that time to branch out. And I touched on Copenhagen as well. And I believe I'll talk about this later, but that is where I really fell in love with watercolor. I was taking a watercolor class. Actually, I have taken 2 watercolor classes. This one was very technical, architecture. We were encouraged to paint outdoors and paint from real life as often as possible, which I think is really a wonderful lesson. Now I would say I work from photos the most just because of time. Like I don't always have things with me, but I always can refer back to a photo, but I try to always take my own reference photos when I can, unless like a client provides me a picture. But this was so special. I mean, like what a dream that I would get to do this. So I guess I was going to talk about my watercolor classes here before we move on to the third topic that speaking of like being willing to do opportunities, my friend asked me to take this watercolor class with her and I really didn't want to, which is like so funny because it changed my whole life. And it's so silly. And the teacher I had was like the kindest like gem of a man ever. And I have like been able to reconnect with him actually because I had other classmates who went on to teach with him and they would share my work with him. His name's Soren, wonderful person who really like encouraged creativity. And we'll talk more about this class, but like I said, this one was more technical. And then when I was back at Cal Poly for my thesis year of architecture, I took another watercolor class from a professor who was much more interested in like abstract ideas and colors and a little more like out there. And I feel like my art kind of landed somewhere between the two because I will still do like paintings of like Taliesin West, like Frank Lloyd Wright and things like that. I won't do as much architecture, but I do feel like I am interested in like detailed work that kind of falls in the middle of that. And I think I kind of got that nice span of I was going to say topics, but that nice span of like detailed versus abstract and subjects. So before we move on to texture, is there any questions from nature? We're good. Okay, awesome. Well, am I doing okay on time also? Is it, I'm good? Okay, perfect. That's perfect. All right, so texture. This is a category I'm very excited about because I talked about cacti. And oh, you know what? Before we move forward, I actually would like to keep things spicy. And I would just love if you have something that comes to mind that inspires you to shout it out, because I would just like to hear what your inspirations are and not just mine. So does anyone have anything that inspires them? Love? Yeah. Art museums, people. Oh, people's a good one. I love that. Hiking, gorgeous. Music. Travel. Love it. Insects. Love it. Art museums was great too. Awesome. Well, like I said, I really hope that throughout this, I can inspire you and give you new ideas. If there's something that comes to mind of how that could be, I would love that to inspire you. And, if you love insects or you love people, I think it's good to be around those things as often as you can. Personally, insects, I don't know how often I want to be around them. No. Yeah. Yeah. They are really fascinating though. My boyfriend's brother did that. There's like an insect class at ASU where you collect like 100 insects in the desert and like display them on a board. And when he showed them to me, they are so amazing, like the detail and the colors. It's really, so I appreciate them too. I really love to paint scorpions, but I would like to be nowhere near them, obviously. So, okay, we'll talk about texture next. And I had to include my habaneros. Again, I also had some purple beans in here that are delicious. But when you see these, I think they're just so interesting. When we talk about sculpture or an art museum being interesting, I mean, these are almost like blown glass and every single one is different. And I have like no hand in like how those turn out differently. Just, you know, the position that they're in and the water and the soil. I think that's just wonderful. So I think like in this image, we're getting everything once again, sunshine, nature, texture, vibrance, growth. I think that's just really spectacular. If anyone's curious, I haven't gardened actually in like a year. I felt kind of like ready for a break, I think, because I was having some frustration. I think maybe my soil like kind of, you know, it like taps out a little bit, like you have to move the plots around and I wasn't having as much success. So it's something I'll get back to, but I haven't done it since this past summer. But when I think about texture, coming back to cacti, which is the subject I paint the most, I am just continually amazed by the texture of cacti. And you know, this is an up close shot of I'm totally blanking on the name now. It's kind of a saguaro, but it has like this incredible texture here, which is not a texture of touch. It's almost like a watercolor. So it's just a visual texture. And then we of course have the ridges, the spines that these come out of. Like, I mean, this looks like something you could only dream of painting, and it just like exists in front of every house, you know, in the suburbs. It's just wonderful. And when I think about texture, it makes me think of different scales and the way that we experience things at different scales, and almost a nod back to architecture. So to explain, this is a cactus I found just on my typical walk in the desert. I love these ones. They're very twisty. And you'll see that these 3 photos I'm going to share with you are all the same cactus. So we're experiencing them at different scales, from farther away to zooming in a bit closer. And at the top of my presentation, I talked about how incredible the sun is of like illuminating and making things glow. This is the picture that does it for me, especially here. Like the way that this truly glows just on its own and captures the light is just amazing. And this is the third picture, all of being the same cactus. So when you think about how you can zoom in and zoom out and have like a totally different visual experience, I find to be so interesting. And I put them side by side here when you think about that. And this amazes me too, because you go on a desert walk, right? And this is one cactus I saw. I probably saw hundreds, if not thousands. Like you could spend like a lifetime just like getting in depth with these. And then when you think about, I really have an appreciation for science too. That's what my boyfriend studies. And I have a friend that works at the Desert Botanical Garden who studies cacti specifically, because they have a wonderful collection that in collaboration with the University of Arizona. When you think about like truly you could, it's just fascinating. And you know, speaking of the zoomed out scale as well, I wanted to include a photo that shows it really from back, zoomed back, because it's so sculptural. Once again, talking about an art piece, it's just a sculpture that exists on its own in nature. And I have had friends from like California come visit me and they'll go, "Oh, you really do have a lot of cacti here." Like it always cracks me up. I'm like, yeah, that's why they're so like on my mind all the time. It's just amazing. And I think a lot of people think they're like these alien, they call them like alien-esque in this sense, because they're so sculptural. It's true. They're just amazing. And speaking of the scale of zooming in and out, like I said, I don't practice architecture now, but it is still something that's always like on my mind and has influenced a lot of the way I think. And I think about the scale of building something also is that you need to think about like the smallest detail of how things are joined together with joinery and hardware and how it's actually going to hold. but then you need to think about how it's perceived at the larger scale and the physical touch of when you're far away from the building and approaching it, and then finding those details. So I think that is why I have that inclination to experience nature in that way. And I guess maybe the education of 5 years of studying this made me like a little more spatial. And I also think it's very similar to art. When you are painting a piece on your easel and you're this close to it, it's very helpful to take some steps back, you know, if that's 3, 5, 10 feet, to see how it's looking as an overall piece, because your art will be experienced at both of those scales. I think similarly, if maybe a lot of you are like digital artists or designers, when you're so zoomed in, doing like the tiniest little clicky things in Adobe Illustrator or whatever, and then you back up, you're like, okay, I got to zoom out for a second. And that could be like a literal zoom out, or it could be physical, like moving your body back to experience it. And we are talking about texture. Of course, I had to touch on just the texture of watercolor being such a versatile, interesting medium. These swatches you've seen throughout my presentation are from this painting that I made, brushed here. And I just think it's crazy how much texture and depth and color you can capture in one swatch, and the texture that you can create with watercolor on like a single flat sheet of paper still fascinates me. And on the note of texture as well, I thought I would note that I have expanded some of my work to include like pastels, as you see here, acrylic paints, oil pens, colored pencil, digital illustration. So I try not to limit myself. Back to variety, it's the spice of life. I like to paint a lot of different subjects, use different tools and mediums and types of projects, because texture adds a new dimension to your work. And when I thought about texture, I also thought about watercolor collage. So these are all cut paper flowers that I painted individually and then layered together. And just like any opportunity for texture in a piece, I think creates that dimension that we get in nature that we experience in real life. All right, move on to growth now, unless there were questions. I guess we can just do them at the end. So I'm doing okay on time too. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Now we'll talk about growth, because growth, I think, lends itself back to the peppers and the nature that we were talking about with keeping things spicy. I have experienced in the years I've been working as an artist a lot of growth. I think that collection, Technicolor Botanical 2015, it's almost been like a 10-year journey now of like working as an artist under my own name and in the types of subjects. My first art business was in 2012. I painted custom skateboards and made skateboards for people. So that was my first art business. So I guess it's been closer to like 12 years now, but kind of in the form you see today has been almost a 10-year journey. And this was one of my most recent projects, and I feel really grateful for the growth and opportunity. And I have to say that it's really not only based on like what I'm doing. It's like the opportunities I've been given where someone takes a chance on you and selects your proposal, or like Laura Lee and Brian approaching me at one of my events and inviting me to speak here. It's like someone's taking that chance on you. So I think my growth has not only been to my credit, it's been to a lot of other people who would take a chance on me, especially like in the early days when I had like 4 prints I offered. Like, it kind of makes me laugh looking back. I'm like, why did you take this chance? But like, I'm so glad you did, because I think every opportunity, we rise to the occasion. And if you give the opportunity, we want to do our best, and then that keeps you moving forward. So this is like an early time with my one watercolor palette I had, which has now evolved into many art supplies to now. And I think when I think about growth, I think about the evolution of my art as well. So we talked about these images relating to the color yellow. This is, a very early piece of mine that was in my first and only actually zine I ever made. I should make more. I have since made like calendars and things instead, but you know, this was kind of the level of detail I would do for the beginning years. And now I have grown as an artist with growth to have a lot more patience and detail. And this artwork in particular is interesting because I have incorporated like 8 different existing artworks that I had already made into this piece. So I have a lot more patience now as an artist. And I don't know really where that came from over time, like maybe maturity or maybe just having more physical space. I think about this painting in particular, which I made in 2017. And it was like the first piece I made in my home studio, that it was the first time I had one room dedicated solely to my art. Up until that point, I had like rented a small space in Scottsdale, or I had like shared an office with my boyfriend. So I don't know if having like, we talked a lot about like spatial things today. I don't know if having like that physical space to work and just like all of your supplies are out. I've always encouraged people to like keep their supplies out, whatever they want to do. I think you will pick it up a lot more often, even like your hobby. Like if you have your sewing machine out, if you have like your coloring book, you are so much more likely to pick it up. So I think maybe some of my growth with that is the physical space, but up until this point, I truly did not have the patience to like paint pieces like this. And this piece is called Charting the Desert. So it was like 12 individual segments capturing the desert. And this is like the piece, it's the original is like this big. And I still don't know like where that came from, but it was kind of that turning point for me where I was like, oh, I can do all of this detail and I can do more layering and time and planning. And then my work evolved from there. And also was just some growth, like we're talking about, that I learned to, I think up until this point, I always wanted to finish every painting in one sitting, and it's just not realistic. And architecture school was a great experience for me because you have to work on these projects over months and months and have a lot more patience. Like you cannot do them in one sitting. So I think maybe that was a good lesson for me. But looking back, maybe that is why I came back to art from architecture, because I could satisfy that desire of sometimes finishing a piece in one sitting, but then also having the patience to like work on a mural over 6 days or whatever it took for me. So I think that was just a good lesson. And when I think about growth, I think about, you know, expanding of my product lines as well. We talked about Technicolor Botanical really inspired me to pursue different product categories, from like enamel pins to jewelry to coasters. And product design has become probably one of my favorite things I do. And I think that could also be just having learned like the Adobe Creative Suite in school. I use that every day. I just think it's really fun to see a project go from your computer screen to holding it physically in your hand. It's just fascinating. And I have created a lot of different product types, including a coloring book. And this also reminded me of the topic of spicy, of just keeping things fresh. So this was kind of a departure for me, I feel, where you know, this is still nature and still desert, but I got to do new subjects within disco, like disco balls and shoes and record players, all within this collection. And when we think about keeping it spicy, I kind of turned this into a series where I sat on my front porch every day and illustrated a page from the coloring book and shared it with my audience. And I just felt like that was a way to keep it spicy and fresh and engaging. It was not something I had done before. I had never really done like I guess I had done like 100-day challenge. I know that was like a big trend for a long time within the world of creativity that someone had coined, but it had been a while. So this is a good way to keep it spicy too, when you think about social media and just keeping people engaged with a series to keep up with. And with growth as well, I feel like I have created projects that I never expected that combined like my art and architecture experience. So this was an installation I did for Desert Ridge Marketplace, and they actually fabricated all the pieces, but I created all of the cut files and the templates for it. And it became this thing that was so physical and so tangible that people were experiencing even when I wasn't on site. And I just find it so interesting because all of that started from just these watercolor paintings once again on my desk. So when we talk about scale as well and growth, it's just amazing when you think about the back and forth and the push and pull of that. So I don't want to go too long. I'll do my final topic here, which is vibrance. And I should note is also the topic, I believe, for Creative Mornings next month, which sounds like a wonderful topic. And I think vibrant is like one of the signature use words that I use to describe my art because color is such a big part of my work. And with color, these signature swatches have become a big signature for me as well. I can't think of another word for it, but back to that Copenhagen architecture watercolor class, our teacher encouraged us to swatch our colors on the page before we painted with them so that we could see how it actually appeared on the page, but we were instructed to cut it off. And I liked how they looked so much that I started putting them in the top right corner of my artworks and leaving them there. And I love that it kind of became like a key of sorts or just like a story about like, these are the colors that are within this painting, but then here's what these created. So it's a little bit of a storytelling. So when I think about vibrance, I really think about those swatches. And I had to show you my first watercolor palette makes an appearance once again. And I wanted a shout out because my mom bought me this palette at Arizona Art Supply when I was 12. And I used to bring it to Minnesota in the summer and paint like the fall too, and like paint the fall leaves. And I still have it and I use it to this day, but I just think that's cool too when you think about growth and someone just handing you one tool and you never know what it will become. So I always think that's fun. And I still use it all the time. And I have just a few more examples here of vibrant. I really don't think we should shy away from colors. And I chose these two pieces because these are totally different mediums. This is, well, there is watercolor here, but there's gouache and acrylic on a wood canvas versus paper. So you can capture those colors in different mediums. Once again, different mediums. This is the watercolor version versus the wood piece that I had to use a little more gouache and texture and acrylic for. And on the note of vibrance too, I feel that we have like almost embraced more color as a society, I guess, especially post-pandemic. I think we're all looking for that joy in our lives and that color. So I have really felt lucky that people have asked me to paint such colorful pieces on the walls of their businesses and homes. Like this piece, for example, I painted at someone's residence who has this little guest house that's an Airbnb. And I just think, wow, it's so colorful that you were willing to be so bold and take a chance with those colors. So I will wrap up now on the topic of spicy. And I have covered sunshine, nature, texture, growth, and vibrance. I hope it has inspired you. And I've included this image. My dad actually yesterday kept saying to me, spicy. He goes, you should tell them, be bold, be bright, because that was one of my first phrases on my first ever greeting cards from that Technicolor botanical collection. I think bold is all about spice. So hope I can encourage you to be bold and be bright and inspire you to create today in your sketchbook. And thank you so much for having me.